I was walking through the ER when a terrified woman grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not my husband, but he's telling everyone he is. Please," she begged in broken English. "He take me from my apartment 3 days ago. They want my kidney." Bruises circled her wrists like bracelets, and a strange injection mark dotted her neck. I checked her chart quickly. Elena Petrova, 28, rare blood type, AB negative with uncommon HLA markers. My stomach dropped. I'd coordinated transplants at Lakeside Memorial for 6 years, and I knew exactly what made her special. Perfect compatibility with our wealthiest transplant patient. I glanced at the well-dressed man watching us from the nurse's station. Dr. Nikolai Volkov, our newest transplant surgeon with credentials even the board couldn't question. He caught my eye and approached with practiced confidence, his smile never reaching his cold eyes. "Ah, Mrs. Petrova is confused from the sedatives," he explained smoothly. "We discussed this, darling. The donor evaluation is routine." He placed a possessive hand on Elena's shoulder, making her flinch. "My wife fears hospitals." I forced a smile while pressing the silent security button beneath the bed rail. "I need to run some tests before pre-op," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Hospital protocol requires private patient interviews." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I'll wait outside." He squeezed Elena's arm before leaving. The moment the door closed, Elena collapsed against me. "Please help," she whispered. "I am not his wife. I clean houses. 3 days ago he come with police badge, say I break immigration law. Take passport, phone, then bring here." Tears streamed down her face. "They make me sign papers. Say I donate voluntary." My mind raced. This was organ trafficking happening right here in our hospital. I'd read reports of black market kidney operations in developing countries, but never imagined facing it personally. I thought of Dmitry Volkov, the tech billionaire who'd been moved suspiciously to the top of our transplant list last month. Same last name as our new surgeon. The connection clicked into place. I heard footsteps approaching and whispered urgently, "I'll help you. Don't sign anything else." I grabbed her chart and started writing as Dr. Irene Walsh, head of transplant ethics, entered. I'd texted her 911 the moment Volkov left.
"Compatibility issue," I muttered, tilting the chart so Irene could see my real note. "Trafficking victim. Not wife. Call police."
Irene's expression never changed, but she squeezed my arm in understanding. "Let's run additional blood work," she said loudly. "We need to check enzyme levels before proceeding." I wheeled Elena's bed toward the lab, deliberately taking the long route past security. Officer James Davis was working today. We'd dated briefly last year before deciding we made better friends. He noticed my distress signal, 3 quick taps on my ID badge, and followed discreetly. Dr. Volkov intercepted us near radiology. "Where are you taking her?" he demanded, his accent thickening with anger. "The evaluation tests are complete." "New protocol for foreign-born donors," Irene replied calmly. "We need to rule out tropical diseases that might affect transplant viability." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "This delays the procedure unnecessarily. Mr. Volkov has waited long enough." "Your brother can wait another day," I said, watching his face pale at my knowledge of their relationship. "Patient safety comes first." He recovered quickly. "You misunderstand. Dmitry is my cousin, not brother. But the damage was done." He'd confirmed the connection. Elena suddenly screamed and clutched her stomach, doubling over in apparent pain. I realized immediately she was creating a distraction. As staff rushed to help, I slipped Officer Davis the note I'd prepared explaining everything. The next hours passed in controlled chaos. Hospital security discreetly locked down the transplant wing while local police and FBI arrived. Elena was moved to a secure room with a female officer stationed inside. Dr. Volkov was detained for questioning, loudly proclaiming diplomatic immunity and threatening lawsuits. When agents searched his temporary office, they found Elena's passport, a burner phone with international contacts, and forged marriage documents. More damning was the $200,000 wire transfer to an offshore account scheduled for after tomorrow's donation. Hospital administration called an emergency meeting. Our transplant program's reputation was at stake. We'd hired Volkov without detecting his criminal connections. The CEO paced nervously, more concerned about publicity than the victim. "This needs to be handled quietly," he insisted. "We can't afford a scandal." I couldn't believe my ears. "A woman was kidnapped and nearly had her kidney stolen," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Quieting this down means covering it up." The CEO glared at me. "Ms. Reeves, your job is coordinating transplants, not making policy decisions. Let's leave this to law enforcement and focus on damage control." Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Layla Kwan interjected, her voice sharp. "With all due respect, Dr. Harmon, this isn't just about your hospital's reputation. We're investigating what appears to be an international organ trafficking ring. Your full cooperation is not optional." The room fell silent. Agent Kwan outlined what they knew so far. Nikolai Volkov had joined our hospital 6 months ago with falsified credentials from prestigious European institutions. His actual background remained unclear, but preliminary investigations suggested connections to organized crime in Eastern Europe. More disturbing was Dmitry Volkov's involvement. The billionaire tech CEO had allegedly financed the entire operation, including bribes to expedite his transplant eligibility. "We need access to all patient records," Agent Kwan continued, "particularly cases where Dr. Volkov was involved or patients who matched unusual compatibility profiles." I raised my hand. "I've been tracking some irregularities in our transplant process for weeks. Several patients with rare matches suddenly withdrew from the program after meeting with Dr. Volkov. I'd noticed the pattern but hadn't connected the dots until now." Agent Kwan's partner, Agent Miguel Ramirez, turned to me. "We'll need those records immediately, and I'd like to interview you separately about these observations." After the meeting, I found Elena heavily sedated but stable. The FBI had stationed an agent outside her door for protection. The hospital staff had been told only that there was a security issue with a patient. Most had no idea of the actual situation. I spent the next several hours with Agents Kwan and Ramirez, pulling files and explaining our transplant procedures. The pattern became clearer with each record. Over the past 6 months, 8 potential donors with rare blood types or tissue matches had either withdrawn from the program or disappeared altogether after consultations with Dr. Volkov. He was harvesting a pool of potential matches, Agent Ramirez concluded grimly. Right. Identifying vulnerable people who could disappear without much notice. I nodded, guilt washing over me, and I never questioned it. People withdraw from donation programs all the time for personal reasons. It's not unusual. Agent Kwan placed a reassuring hand on my arm. You couldn't have known. These operations are sophisticated for a reason. The investigation expanded rapidly. By midnight, 3 more people connected to Volkov had been detained, including our new transplant nurse, Vera Popova, who'd been hired on Volkov's recommendation. She'd apparently been responsible for altering medical records and sedating patients before they were moved. I finally went home around 2 a.m., exhausted and shaken. My apartment felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the day. I double-checked the locks before collapsing onto my couch, too wired to sleep despite my fatigue. The faces of those missing donors haunted me. How many had already lost organs? How many were even still alive? My phone rang at 5:30 a.m. It was Irene, her voice tense. Amelia, you need to come in now. Dr. Harmon is trying to proceed with Dmitry Volkov's transplant using another donor. Says the FBI has no jurisdiction over medical decisions. I was already pulling on clothes. That's insane. Who's the donor? A woman named Katya Orlova. Claims she's Dmitry's cousin and a voluntary donor. But her paperwork appeared overnight, and she seems heavily sedated. I made it to the hospital in record time, fear and anger fueling me. In the transplant wing, I found Irene arguing with Dr. Harmon outside the surgical prep area. Through the window, I could see a young woman being prepped for surgery. She looked disoriented, her movements sluggish. This is a legitimate transplant, Dr. Harmon insisted. Ms. Orlova has signed all the consent forms. The FBI investigation doesn't give you the right to deny life-saving treatment to Mr. Volkov. Consent under duress isn't consent, I countered, stepping into the conversation. And those forms are probably as fake as Elena Petrova's marriage certificate.
Dr. Harmon turned on me, face flushed with anger. You're overstepping, Ms. Reeves. One more word and you're suspended.
Suspend me then, I replied, pulling out my phone to call Agent Kwan. But I'm not letting you cut open a trafficking victim. What happened next shocked all of us. Irene stepped between us and said quietly, the transplant proceeds as planned. She handed Dr. Harmon a file. I've verified and approved all documentation. I stared at her in disbelief. Irene, the ethics director, the one person I thought I could trust completely, was authorizing this atrocity. Before I could react, security guards appeared on either side of me. Please escort Miss Reeves from the building, Dr. Harmon ordered. Her hospital access is revoked pending review. As the guards led me toward the exit, I caught Irene's eye. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod and mouthed what looked like, trust me. Then she turned away, following Dr. Harmon into the prep area. Outside in the parking lot, I immediately called Agent Kwan. No answer. I tried Agent Ramirez next, and was relieved when he picked up on the second ring. They're doing the transplant anyway, I blurted out. A new donor appeared overnight. Something's very wrong. Stay where you are, he replied tensely. We're already on our way. I paced the parking lot for 20 agonizing minutes before FBI vehicles pulled in. Agents Kwan and Ramirez approached me quickly. The hospital's blocked our access, Agent Kwan explained, claiming medical emergency privilege. We need a warrant to stop the procedure. That could take hours, I said desperately. The surgery will be done by then. Agent Ramirez hesitated, then pulled me aside. What if we told you Irene Walsh is working with us? Has been for months? I blinked in surprise. What? But she just approved the transplant. She's undercover, he explained quietly. We've been tracking this network for over a year. Dr. Walsh approached us after noticing similar patterns at her previous hospital. The Volkovs aren't just trafficking individual organs, they're running a global network that serves wealthy clients worldwide. My mind raced to process this new information. So she's letting the transplant proceed as part of your investigation? No, Agent Kwan interjected. She's buying us time. The surgical team has been subtly delayed. Equipment malfunctions, missing supplies, administrative hurdles, but they can't stall forever. What about the donor? I asked, suddenly remembering the sluggish woman I'd seen. Katya Orlova is real, but she's not there voluntarily. Facial recognition matched her to a missing persons report from Philadelphia. Cleaning service employee, disappeared 4 days ago. Determination hardened within me. I can get you in, through the service entrance. My badge is deactivated for the main doors, but the loading dock uses a different system. It might still work.
Agent Kwan nodded sharply. Lead the way.
We moved quickly through the early morning shadows toward the back of the hospital. My heart pounded as I pressed my badge against the reader. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the light flashed green, and the door unlocked. Service elevators are this way, I whispered, guiding them through familiar corridors. They connect directly to each wing, including transplant. As we hurried through the basement hallways, Agent Ramirez received a message. Irene says they're moving Katya to OR4 now. Dmitry Volkov is already under anesthesia. We stepped into the service elevator, tension thick in the small space. I pressed the button for the surgical floor, praying we weren't too late. When the doors opened, we found chaos. Irene stood arguing loudly with Dr. Harmon, while nurses and technicians looked on uncomfortably. The compatibility tests are inconclusive, she insisted. We cannot proceed without confirming tissue matching. The tests were already done, Dr. Harmon snapped. You're deliberately obstructing this procedure. People are waiting. Irene spotted us over his shoulder, her relief visible for just a moment before her professional mask slid back into place. Dr. Harmon turned and saw the FBI agents approaching, his face draining of color. "This is a restricted area," he stammered. "You can't—"
Agent Kwan cut him off, displaying her badge. FBI. This procedure is halted pending investigation of organ trafficking.
The surgical team froze. Dr. Harmon's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "This is outrageous! Mr. Volkov is a respected businessman who paid $2 million to jump the transplant list and steal a kidney from an unwilling victim." Agent Ramirez finished, unfolding a document. "We have a warrant to halt this procedure and seize all related medical records." Everything happened quickly after that. Additional agents arrived and secured the surgical wing. Katya Orlova was taken to recovery, where she gradually emerged from sedation, confused and terrified. Dmitry Volkov, still unconscious, was placed under guard in a private room. Dr. Harmon was escorted to an interview room for questioning. I found Irene in her office, looking exhausted but relieved. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you," she said quietly. "We couldn't risk compromising the investigation." "You let me think you'd betrayed everything you stand for," I replied, still processing the deception. "I understand why, but it hurt," she finished for me. "I know, and I'm truly sorry for that." I nodded, accepting her apology. "How deep does this go? How many people in the hospital are involved?" She sighed heavily. "We've identified at least 4 staff members directly involved, including Dr. Harmon. He wasn't just protecting the hospital's reputation, he was being paid to facilitate these transplants." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Dr. Richard Harmon, CEO of Lakeside Memorial, respected physician with decades of service, was actively participating in organ trafficking. The betrayal cut deep. "There's more," Irene continued grimly. "This network has operated in at least 6 hospitals across 3 states. Hundreds of victims, Amelia. Some coerced into voluntary donation through threats or financial pressure. Others simply taken, their organs harvested, and their bodies disposed of." Horror washed over me as I thought about the missing donors from our program. What about the others? The people who disappeared from our transplant registry? Irene's expression darkened. "We're still searching. 3 have been located alive. 1 was found deceased last month in a motel room missing a kidney. The others, we don't know yet." The next few days passed in a blur of interviews, evidence collection, and media frenzy. Despite the hospital's attempts to control the narrative, the story broke nationally. "Organ trafficking ring exposed at prestigious hospital," screamed the headlines. Our phones rang constantly with journalists seeking exclusives. Elena Petrova recovered gradually, both physically and emotionally. With the FBI's help, her immigration status was adjusted to allow her to remain in the country legally. She provided crucial testimony about her abduction and the forged documents. Katya Orlova told a similar story. Grabbed from outside her apartment building, kept drugged in a motel for days, then brought to the hospital as a family donor. The investigation expanded rapidly. Financial records revealed an elaborate network spanning multiple countries. Wealthy clients paid millions for guaranteed organs, often bypassing years-long waiting lists. The Volkov brothers, and DNA tests confirmed they were indeed brothers, not cousins, had connections to criminal organizations throughout Eastern Europe and Asia. A week after the initial arrest, Agent Kwan called me into a secure conference room at the FBI field office. Maps and photos covered the walls, a visual representation of the trafficking network they'd uncovered. "We found another facility," she explained, pointing to a remote location marked on the map. "A private surgical center in upstate New York. According to financial records, they've been doing off-the-books transplants for at least 3 years." "How many victims?" I asked, dreading the answer. "We don't know exactly," Agent Ramirez replied, "but we've identified at least 28 patients who received organs there. All wealthy, all connected to the Volkovs in some way. And the donors?" His expression darkened. "No records of donors," which suggests they weren't keeping track because they didn't need to. These weren't people who were coming back for follow-up care. The implication hung heavy in the air. People taken, organs harvested, bodies disposed of. Tears burned behind my eyes as I thought of all those lives ended for the profit of the already wealthy. "We're planning a raid," Agent Kwan continued, "and we'd like you to consult. Your expertise in transplantation could help us understand what we find there." I agreed without hesitation, though the thought terrified me. What horrors would we discover? The raid was scheduled for dawn 2 days later. I rode with Agents Kwan and Ramirez, nerves jangling as we approached the nondescript building set back from the main road. From the outside, it looked like any small private medical facility. Clean, professional, unremarkable. Only the absence of signage hinted at its secretive nature. Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical teams secured the perimeter before moving in. I waited in the vehicle as instructed, watching agents in body armor enter the building. Minutes stretched into an hour before Agent Kwan returned, her face grim. "You can come in now," she said quietly. "Prepare yourself. It's worse than we thought." The interior was immaculate. State-of-the-art operating rooms, recovery areas, and monitoring equipment. But the clinical perfection made the evidence of human suffering all the more disturbing. In one room, patient files detailed dozens of transplant procedures with clinical precision, but no identifying information for the donors. In another room, personal effects, wallets, phones, clothing, were cataloged and stored in plastic bins. "These belong to the victims," Agent Ramirez explained. "They keep them in case they need to stage accidental deaths or create false trails." Most disturbing was the small morgue in the basement. 3 bodies lay in cold storage, each marked only with blood type and organ viability notes. No names, no dignity, just parts to be harvested. I stepped outside, gulping fresh air, fighting nausea. Agent Kwan followed, giving me space but staying close. "I've been doing this job for 15 years," she said after a while. I thought nothing could shock me anymore. I was wrong. How many? I managed to ask. Based on the records we've found so far, at least 65 people in the past 2 years. And this is just one facility. The enormity of it crushed me. 65 lives ended for their organs. 65 families wondering what happened to their loved ones. And somewhere, 65 recipients who either didn't know or didn't care where their new organs came from. We need to identify them, I said finally. The victims deserve that much. We will, she promised. That's why we need your help reviewing the medical records. You might see patterns or details we'd miss. The next several weeks blurred together in a haze of evidence review, witness interviews, and gradual revelations. The Volkov's network was more extensive than anyone had imagined, with connections to legitimate hospitals, private clinics, and organ procurement organizations. The victims came primarily from vulnerable populations, undocumented immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, those in financial distress. One discovery hit particularly close to home. Records from the private clinic included notes about an arrangement with Lakeside Memorial that predated Nikolai Volkov's arrival. Someone had been feeding them information about potential matches for years. Dr. Harmon wasn't just accepting bribes, Agent Kwan explained during one of our evidence review sessions. He was an active participant from the beginning. He helped create the network. The betrayal cut deep. I'd worked with Dr. Harmon for 6 years, trusted him, respected him. He'd written my recommendation for graduate school, attended my father's funeral, mentored me through difficult cases. And all that time, he'd been participating in what amounted to murder for profit. As the case built toward prosecution, I struggled with my role at the hospital. The transplant program had been temporarily suspended pending a complete review and restructuring. Many staff members had left, unable to face the scrutiny or unwilling to rebuild from the ashes of scandal. I considered leaving too, even applied for positions at other hospitals. But something kept me from accepting any offers. Irene found me in the empty transplant coordination office one evening, staring at the wall of patient photos. People who'd received legitimate transplants over the years, their lives transformed by the gift of donation. Thinking of leaving? She asked gently. I nodded. How do we come back from this? How do we ask people to trust us again? She settled into the chair beside me. By earning that trust. By building something better from the ruins. The new administration is committed to transparency and ethical practice. But will it be enough? I asked. People died, Irene, because of systems we were part of. Yes, she agreed soberly. And that can't be undone. But what happens next is still within our power to shape. The federal prosecution moved forward methodically. Nikolai and Dmitry Volkov, Dr. Harmon, and 16 others faced charges ranging from fraud to kidnapping to murder. The evidence was overwhelming, with financial records, medical documentation, and victim testimony creating an airtight case. Elena Petrova and Katya Orlova both agreed to testify, despite threats against them and their families. I sat with Elena during her preparation sessions with the prosecutors, offering support as she relived her traumatic experience again and again. Why did they choose me? She asked one afternoon, her English much improved after months of classes. So many people in the world. Why me? I explained the rare combination of blood type and tissue markers that made her a perfect match for Dmitry Volkov. It's like winning a terrible lottery, I said. The odds of that specific compatibility are incredibly small. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. In my country, we say some coincidences are fate. Maybe this was mine. Not to lose my kidney, but to help stop these men. Her resilience humbled me. Despite everything she'd endured, she found meaning in her role in bringing down the trafficking network. The trials began 11 months after Elena first grabbed my arm in the ER. I testified multiple times, explaining the transplant process, the rarity of certain matches, and the impossibility that these donations were legitimate. Medical records showed sedation levels that would prevent informed consent. Forged documents fell apart under expert examination. Dr. Harmon maintained his innocence until confronted with financial records showing millions flowing through offshore accounts. His testimony then shifted to minimizing his involvement, claiming he only looked the other way rather than actively participating. But email records told a different story, detailed discussions about potential donors and their suitability for harvest. I was in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts for the Volkov brothers, Dr. Harmon, and most of their associates. Nikolai and Dmitry Volkov received multiple life sentences. Dr. Harmon, despite his attorney's arguments about his age and community standing, was sentenced to 40 years, effectively a life sentence for a man in his 60s. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around the prosecutors, victims, and investigators. I stood to the side with Irene, watching Elena speak briefly to the cameras, her head held high as she described her hope that the verdicts would bring some peace to the families of those who hadn't survived. What happens now? I asked Irene as we walked away from the media frenzy. Healing, she replied. For the victims, for the hospital, for all of us who were part of this story. The rebuilding of Lakeside's transplant program began slowly. External audits, new protocols, ethical oversight committees with actual authority. I decided to stay, accepting a new position as Director of Transplant Ethics and Advocacy, a role created specifically to prevent future abuses. My first initiative was establishing a memorial for the victims of the trafficking ring, a quiet garden on the hospital grounds with a simple stone marker, in remembrance of those whose lives were taken. May their memory inspire our commitment to ethical care and human dignity. Elena visited the memorial on its dedication day. She'd started nursing school, determined to transform her experience into a career helping others. We stood together in the gentle sunshine, reading the names of those who had been identified. Too many remained unknown, represented only by blank spaces on the stone. When I grabbed your arm that day, she said quietly, I had no hope left. I thought I would die in that hospital. I remembered her desperate grip, the terror in her eyes. I almost kept walking, I admitted. I almost convinced myself you were just confused from medication. She turned to me, her expression serious. But you didn't. You stopped. You listened. Sometimes that is all it takes to change everything. 1 year after the sentencing, I received a letter from Dr. Harmon. I nearly threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. His handwriting, once familiar on patient charts and evaluation forms, now seemed like the script of a stranger. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. What began as a single compromise to help one desperate patient cascaded into unforgivable crimes. I tell myself I never meant it to go so far, but intentions count for nothing against actions. You were right to stop it. I was wrong in every way that matters. I never replied. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, nor should they be. Instead, I channeled my energy into reform. Our transplant program eventually reopened with unprecedented transparency. Every donation was verified through multiple independent channels. Every recipient knew exactly where their gift of life originated. Elena graduated from nursing school with honors and joined our staff, bringing unique insight to her work with transplant patients. Katya returned to her home country but stayed in touch, sending occasional updates as she rebuilt her life. The FBI investigation continued to uncover connections to the trafficking network, resulting in additional arrests and the rescue of more potential victims. Agent Kwan called periodically with updates, and I provided consultation on new cases that intersected with medical systems. On the second anniversary of that day in the ER, I stood again in the memorial garden. New names had been added as victims were identified, each representing a life cut short by greed and ethical failure. I placed a small stone on the marker, following the Jewish tradition I'd learned from Irene, a sign that someone had visited, that the dead were remembered. A voice behind me said, "It never gets easier, does it?" I turned to find Agent Kwan, looking much the same despite the passing years. No, I agreed. It shouldn't get easier. That's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. She nodded, understanding. The network is dismantled, but the conditions that allowed it to flourish still exist. Desperate patients, shortage of organs, medical systems driven by profit. Then we keep working, I said simply. We remember that moment of choice, to walk past or to stop, to look away or to see, to remain silent or to speak. We stood together in the quiet garden, honoring those who had no choice, and recommitting to the choices still before us.